This case takes place in the United Kingdom in the year 2000. Leanne was born on the 27th of September 1984 in the city of Leeds, which is located in the north of England. She was brought into this world by her mother Sharon and her father Michael, and had a loving older sister named Michelle who was 3 years older. The family lived in an area of Leeds called Bramley. Bramley was like many suburban residential areas within a city. It had a strong sense of community. Leanne and her sister enjoyed a good life and had a typical 1990s West Yorkshire upbringing and regularly attended their local church with their grandmother. Unfortunately, at some point during Leanne's childhood, her mother and father divorced. Michael moved out from the home but maintained a relationship with his daughters. Leanne was known to her friends and family as loving and happy. She was thoughtful, always knowing the birthdays of her friends and family. She would make sure at least that she had a birthday card. She would be the centre of the party, outgoing, dancing, and talking to everybody and anybody. She was also a caregiver and always entertained and played with children at a family event. As she grew older, she made a lot of friends. Her mother would later tell reporters that she was fiercely loyal to her friends and would always put them first. By the time she was of age, she started secondary school at West Leeds High School, and when she was 16, she got together with her first boyfriend. On the 26th of November 2000, the day began like any other Sunday. Leanne put on her new boots and headed to her grandma's house in the morning. Her grandmother was named Hilary, and the two often went to Sunday school. After finishing, Leanne left her grandmother and waved goodbye. Tragically, little did Hilary know, this would be their last farewell. Leanne arrived home and started looking through the catalogue for what she wanted to buy her friend for Christmas. Once she had decided on the present, she had to go and get it. She kissed her mother on the cheek and raced out of the door. She then met up with her friend named Sarah Whitehouse, and the two spent the remainder of the day shopping in Leeds town centre. With the shops closing at 4 p.m, the girls headed back to Bramley by bus at 4:30 p.m. Leanne was expected to be home soon, as her family would be preparing a Sunday roast. Leanne and Sarah got off the bus in Bramley and headed to the entrance of Huffley Gill via Huffley Lane. At 4:50 p.m, they said their goodbyes and headed their separate ways. Sarah walked the rest of the way home, arriving at around 5 p.m, whilst Leanne embarked on her final stretch through Huffley Gill. Huffley Gill is a dimly lit, thin parcel of wooded land surrounded by two sides of housing. When Sarah arrived home, she made a phone call to Leanne's house, but she was surprised to hear that Leanne had not arrived home yet. Leanne's mother Sharon grew concerned and tried calling her daughter several times, but there was no answer. This was unusual for Leanne. She was sometimes a little late, but never this late, and she always picked up her mobile phone. At 7 p.m, Sharon was certain that something was horribly wrong, so she made a call to the police. The panic started to set in, but Sharon was clutching on to hope that Leanne would return soon. Sharon believed that she may be home by 10 p.m, as she was known to do this from time to time. But 10 p.m. came round, and Leanne was still nowhere to be seen. The family hoped that Leanne was being rebellious, albeit very out of character. Leanne's sister Michelle couldn't just sit by and wait. She wanted to find her sister. There was no torch in the house, so she went to a local church and asked the caretaker if she could borrow one, and she began searching Bramley. It wasn't long before the police and the family came to the same obvious conclusion. Leanne really was truly missing. Detective Superintendent Chris Gregg of the West Yorkshire Police was put in charge of this missing persons case and commenced a search campaign on an unprecedented scale. At the time, there were 700,000 residents in Leeds, and Chris knew that the first 48 hours of a missing persons case were crucial. The police began searching where Leanne was last seen. When planning the search effort, he scoured the police station for a pen to draw a potential route that Leanne might have taken. The only pen he could find was red. From that moment on, the route was referred to as the Red Route. This built the spine of the search area, which grew legs into the surrounding areas of Bramley. Hundreds of outhouses, sheds and other buildings were searched, along with a 4-mile stretch of the Leeds Canal. The police obtained search warrants for over 1,000 residential homes in the Bramley area. They searched a further 142 commercial properties and businesses, and questioned many workers. They even searched 38 drainage shafts. These numbers do vary from source to source, however these figures were from Chris Gregg's recount of the events. Many things were found during the searches, such as 6 mobile phones, jewellery and shopping bags, but none of these belonged to Leanne. The police rounded up the most high-risk and dangerous people, with histories of SA, 36 people in total. All 36 were interviewed and inspected, but they all cleared with 100% confidence. Every minute, hour and day that went by increased the likelihood that Leanne would not be found. Chris Gregg could confidently say that he had searched the Bramley area as thoroughly as humanly possible. The case made national media, and this led to a witness coming forward saying that she saw a man walking a terrier dog who she had never seen before on Huffley Gill. A description of his features and face was drawn up and distributed across local papers. Leanne had made the walk through Huffley Gill numerous times before and had no reason to feel unsafe. After all, this was her local community and she had lived there for many years. But Leanne was in the sights of a callous, cunning and diabolical man, a man named John Taylor. John Taylor was born on the 27th of August 1956 in Leeds. He appeared to be an ordinary, normal and understated man. He kept himself to himself, not mixing with the neighbours very much. He had a very limited social life, and he divorced his wife in 1996 and was living in a run-down, filthy terraced house down Cockshot Drive in a nearby area of Leeds called Bramley. The people who did know him, though, thought he was very odd. His day job was working at Parcel Force as a delivery driver, but at night, his nocturnal activities seemed to get the attention of the locals. He enjoyed going out to nearby woodlands to hunt animals, such as game and rabbits. He even brought along an ex-lover to a particular woodland hunt one night. This particular wood was Linley Wood, near the town of Otley in North Leeds, a wooded area that he was very familiar with. This was the place where he first got the taste of hunting back in the Boys Brigade days. The Boys Brigade is similar to the Scouts but is run by Christians. From a young age, John loved capturing and killing small animals. He was a known animal abuser with an unofficial record of torturing the animals he captured, but he never had a criminal conviction for this. The only time he was ever arrested was for stealing a suit when he was 15 years old. On the flip side to this horrific cruelty, he kept 30 pets, and the locals named him the Pet Man. Most of these pets were dogs, but he had a wide range of animals which included ferrets. John also had a number of fetishes. He was a regular with some sex workers, and had an obsession with bondage and whips. People are entitled to their kinks, so long as nobody is harmed. However, one of the women who would previously service him would later say that he wanted to tie up her 15-year-old daughter and force himself upon her. On the night that Leanne went missing, she was walking through Huffley Gill, and John Taylor was hidden in the darkness. When she was close enough, John made his move. He had planned for this moment. He jumped out of the shadows and clutched Leanne by the arms, telling her not to scream. He then took off his large, thick, black padded Parcel Force coat and put it around her. He then proceeded to blindfold her using his scarf. Next, he tied her hands with a dog lead and told her to walk. John led Leanne through Bramley on a 22-minute-long walk along residential roads surrounded by houses, all the way to his house in Bramley. It is baffling how nobody had seen him marching a 16-year-old girl blindfolded through the streets. Once they arrived at John's house, he made his way to the kitchen area and forced Leanne to sit down on his reclaimed church pew. He looked at her, likely overjoyed that his plan had actually worked. John began drinking whiskey, whilst acknowledging that Leanne's phone was calling non-stop. It was Leanne's family and friends desperately trying to get a hold of her. After a number of phone calls, he turned off the mobile phone and carried her upstairs to his bedroom, where he planned to force himself upon her. John removed the dog lead from her hands and then tied her hands behind her back with 3 cable ties, one around each wrist and then one linking the two together like a chain. What happened next was a key talking point during the trial. John's version of events was that Leanne struggled, and during her struggle, she kicked John and fell onto the floor and banged her head, resulting in her passing away. However, evidence that was later found pointed to an alternative sequence of events. What likely happened was that John placed her onto the bed, intending to force himself upon her, but at some point during or after, the scarf fell from her face and she saw the man committing the horrific essay upon her. Now knowing his identity, John had to kill her, and in doing so, he used the same scarf around her neck to strangle her. But this wasn't enough, so he reached out for a 12-inch cable tie and wrapped it around her neck. This cable tie was so tight that police records show that it measured 10 centimeters in circumference. Just to be clear, that would mean her neck was compressed to little over an inch. Now, John knew he had to dispose of her body, which according to the police is a very difficult task. John placed a green heavy-duty plastic bag around her head and tied it tight with a dog collar, leaving the scarf and cable tie around her neck. He then proceeded to place her body inside the same large bin bags, tying the ends with black twine. He placed her inside 10 bags in total, alternating the opening in a top and tail fashion. It is not clear whether his next actions were for future gratification, for control, or as a way for collecting a trophy. John had a large household freezer in his kitchen. He placed Leanne's body inside and kept her there for 9 months. During this time, the police were convinced that she had been abducted. Detective Chris Gregg's frustration grew as they repeatedly pondered her whereabouts and fate. Leanne had been missing for a month when the trail started to go cold. Despite extensive investigations and massive media national coverage, there were no new leads. As more time passed, the family was in turmoil, their lives shattered, clinging to the desperate hope that she might walk through the door one day. Each day was a blur as they struggled to make sense of what had happened, trying to navigate through their devastating loss. But what actually happened to their daughter would soon come to the fore. John Taylor's fridge freezer had started to malfunction, and it was only a matter of time before the smell of Leanne's decomposition would seep through the plastic bags. John picked her up and wrapped her in a quilted duvet, placed the body into the car, and began driving up north. Just like many murderers, he was looking to dispose of his victim in a place that he was familiar with. John chose Linley Woods, the place I mentioned earlier where he had taken his ex-girlfriend on a date. Linley Woods is located 20 miles north of the Red Route search area. He made sure that nobody was around and dumped her body between some shrubbery near a dirt track only 50 yards from the parking lot. On the 21st of August 2001, a man was walking his dog. This man's name was Mark Bison. Mark spotted something that appeared to be suspicious in the woodlands. He approached with caution, but he didn't have to get too close before he realized what he had stumbled across. Feeling panicked, Mark called 999 and requested that the local police come and investigate what he found in the woods, as he had suspicions that there could be a body within the quilt. When the police arrived, they removed the duvet and saw a bin bag with a body-shaped object inside. They then proceeded to cut through the bin liners layer by layer before opening the final layer to see a sock. They unravelled the last plastic bag, and there was Leanne, with her hair in a ponytail and her hair clips in the same position she wore them the last day she went missing. She was found with her mobile phone, keys, umbrella, and the Christmas present she had bought for her friend. By the 22nd of August, Detective Chris Gregg officially announced that the case of Leanne was now a murder investigation. Forensics studied the scene and Leanne's body in great detail. The body underwent tape lifting and a post-mortem. Tape lifting exercise is when pieces of tape are stuck to the body and removed, collecting possible foreign skin cells, semen, and fibers. However, no DNA evidence was found, although there were some red fibers found in her hair and dog hairs found in some corners of the duvet. A post-mortem revealed that the degree of composition was not consistent with a 9-month-old corpse. Further investigation into the microstructure of the cardiac muscle tissue confirmed that she was placed in a sub-zero temperature for a long period of time. The investigation was struggling to piece the puzzle together, but Chris Gregg was not going to give up, and he went into a level of detail unimaginable to the normal person. First, he examined the 3 cable ties that bound her hands. His team noticed that they were produced by 3 different manufacturers after researching the small code embedded in them. They were trying to pinpoint where they were sold from. One of the ties that was used was yellow. The investigators knew that the Royal Mail purchased the majority of yellow cable ties, and there just so happened to be a large Royal Mail outlet within Leeds, so the perpetrator must have had an affiliation with either the Royal Mail or a parcel delivery company that services the Royal Mail. Next, they investigated the bin liners. Due to the unique striations made on the folds where the plastic is melted together, the detectives could pinpoint the exact bin bag machine that manufactured the 10 bin bags. They managed to find the factory in the northeast of England and found the particular machine they came from. It turned out that this machine made bin bags for Morrison's supermarket, the major supermarket in Bramley. Now, none of this uncovered a perpetrator, until the team turned their eyes to the dog collar. They discovered that the dog collar was manufactured in Nottingham, but they were produced in the thousands annually. Also, there were over 30 to 40 pet shops in the Leeds area, with even more wholesalers totaling 114 nationally who sold this specific dog collar. This would have been a titanic task, going through every distributor to discover who sold this particular collar. And it was. Detective Chris Gregg commenced the inquiry of all 114 wholesalers and got nowhere. That was until wholesale number 112. This was Pets Pajamas, a company that deals in internet orders distributed from Merseyside. They asked the company if they could bring up every order that was requested from the Leeds area for this specific collar, and they did. They found a Mr. John Taylor from Bramley. He had bought 6 dog collars in the 3 months prior, along with dog bowls and leads. The detectives wasted no time. They got a warrant for his arrest, and they searched his property. They searched his house from top to bottom, noticing the dilapidated living conditions that John subjected himself to. It was obvious that he had a thing for animals, and the officers swiftly noticed a large fridge freezer. But one piece of evidence that struck the investigators was a newspaper. The front page covered the discovery of Leanne's murder. They also noticed that the floor had no carpet, but the nails that secured the previous carpet were still there. Upon closer inspection, there were red fibers still attached to the nails, the same red fibers that were found in Leanne's hair. There were also shards of green plastic bin bags matching the same bin bag that Leanne was concealed in. Yellow cable ties were found, and the police learned of his role as a parcel force delivery driver. They also found all of the dog collars sold to him, apart from the one that was around her neck. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a woman had noticed a suspicious-looking man she had never seen before walking a terrier dog around the time that Leanne vanished. The detectives were on the lookout for the terrier dog that was spotted by the witness. They did, however, find the dog in a rather twisted and strange setting. They found the dog buried in the back. Its head was stoved in with a meat cleaver. It became clear that John had killed and disposed of the terrier dog once the dog was included in the eyewitness account. With all of this evidence, the police knew they had their man. At first they questioned him, but he denied all knowledge of the murder, and he even claimed he had not been in the woods in years. However, it didn't take long before he presented a full confession of the kidnap and murder of Leanne. But even with the confession, he still tried to minimalize his actions, making them sound less intense and less harrowing. He was reluctant to admitting to essaying her and wouldn't admit to keeping her in a freezer despite the abundance of evidence. Detective Chris Gregg described him as a callous and calculated man who would only admit to doing something if his back was up against the wall. There was nothing about him that was overly forthcoming. The trial would soon begin, and John Taylor pleaded guilty to kidnap and murder on the 8th of July 2002, and he was sentenced to a mandatory term of life imprisonment. The judge overseeing the case said, "This was as cold and calculating as can be imagined. You are a dangerous sexual sadist. Your purpose in kidnapping this young girl was that so you could satisfy your perverted cravings. The suffering you caused her and the suffering you continue to cause those who loved her simply cannot be measured." Leanne's mother Sharon said, "Although John Taylor has been locked up, our agony continues. We are just pleased that he has been locked up so he can't do this to anyone else." It was true that John was locked up, only eligible for parole after 30 years. But there were still questions that remained in the back of Detective Chris Gregg's mind. Were there any more victims? At the end of John's trial, Detective Chris Gregg said, "We do not believe that this is his first major crime he has committed. We feel that the way this murder was pre-planned and the way he hid and disposed of the body was calculated. We cannot exclude the possibility that he has killed before." As a result, he reopened dozens of unsolved crimes. One crime in particular that stood out to Chris Gregg was that of Yvonne Fitt. Yvonne was a 33-year-old woman from Bradford who worked as a lady of the night. She was found dead only a few yards away from where Leanne's body was dumped in 1992. But after a while, even more were uncovered. In 1994, a 13-year-old called Lindsay Rimmer disappeared after leaving her home in Hebden Bridge, 20 miles from Bramley. Her body was later found in a canal 5 months later, strangled and smothered. In 1995, Deborah Wood, aged 20, was found on fire at Leeds railway station and died of 90% burns. In 2001, Rebecca Hall, aged 19, worked as a lady of the night and was found dead in Bradford. And a former detective named Chris Clark is convinced that a 20-year-old woman named Anne Ballantyne was John's first victim, who was killed in 1986. Now, these murders have circumstantial evidence linking John to the crimes, but not enough to convict him in a court of law, and he wasn't willing to confess to any. Having said that, further investigations linked John Taylor to 2 essays in the Bramley area, one in 1988 and one in 1989. This time, the police had evidence. The first incident occurred in October of 1988, when a 32-year-old woman was attacked while she was walking across Huffley Gill to collect her children from school. John Taylor was masked and armed with a knife, where he carried out a serious essay. And then, in March of 1989, John Taylor essayed a 21-year-old woman in her home after breaking in. In 2002, John denied these allegations, but the DNA evidence that was discovered was overwhelming, and he later admitted to these crimes. And then, in 2018, when John was 62, he had a change of heart. He miraculously decided to confess to a series of vile and sadistic essays against women and children between 1977 and 1996. These were his confessions. In 1977, he forced himself on a barmaid just before Christmas. In 1984, he essayed a 7-year-old girl after she was tied to a drainpipe of the church in Bramley. He also confessed to forcing himself upon a 27-year-old mother of 3 in front of her children, doing so at knife point. After these confessions, John Taylor had an additional 14 offences added to his horrific list of crimes. The court proceedings that followed resulted in a sentence of life without parole. It is safe to say that John Taylor will never see freedom again. As of right now, John is considered to be one of Britain's most dangerous criminals.